Stop and ask questions if you guys want, but if you don't want to talk, I'll just move on. Um, okay, can you guys all see? Let's see my screen here. Perfect. So my name is John DeRelay. I'm the head of revenue management education here at Wheelhouse. Um, Excited to talk to you about some high-level data in Hilton Head and Savannah. We're experimenting with kind of combining some regions just to see if we can talk about them together. So I'll pulled up data for both Hilton Head and the Savannah area. Um, Really excited to kind of chat with you guys about that today. We're going to look into kind of how the occupancy trends have been going. If we have some time and you're talking to me, we can look into some more specific neighborhood or beach data. I'm going to start at the high level data, and then we're going to kind of drop down into, if we have time, into specific areas that you request. Um, cool. First thing I do want to point out, and this is not a sales call, but one thing that I do want to bring up to you guys is I am going to be using Wheelhouse data. Quite a lot of this data is free. We have recently kind of opened up most of our business intelligence tools to be available for everyone. So if you're not currently a Wheelhouse user, you can access all of the market report data that I show you for free. Uh, we also offer a full business intelligence tool, kind of like a key data light for your own portfolio data for free. And then if we go into the neighborhood data, some of that is free, although part of that is paid. So just a little kind of reminder, we know it's kind of a tough year for making sure you're on pace and all this stuff. A lot of this information is available to you without having to be a Wheelhouse customer. Okay, so we'll kind of jump in, but one thing that would help me is, are you guys, if you could tell me if you're like, you can tell me in the chat if you want to, if you're in like Savannah area or in like Hilton Head area or where you are, just so I can not waste your guys' time by talking about areas you're not in.
We're in Hilton Head.
Thanks, Candace.
Sorry, I'm multitasking here. I'm also in
Oh, you're
Hilton
good.
Head with Candace.
Perfect.
And I am Savannah and Tybee.
Perfect. Matt, are you able to tell us where you are too?
Yeah, we're based on Hilton Head.
Perfect. Thank you. And just as a quick one, and if you guys don't want to answer, I'll move on. But how have you guys felt the year has been going? Like, what have you been seeing in a general sense in your portfolios in terms of pacing, that kind of thing? Have you felt things been going?
I can speak to Tybee and Savannah. Savannah's been pretty much on what has happened in a previous year, just a shorter booking window. And Tybee occupancy is good, but ADR has had to go down to get that occupancy. And again, the booking window is shorter. So, book some 10 to 12 months in advance, but then it just, for summer, waited and waited and waited. And now, we're seeing that uptick. So, I mean, most of the properties are doing really well, but it took time. Patience.
That makes sense. That makes sense. I've heard from a lot of revenue managers that I talk to, particularly across the South and Southeast, of they've been referring to it as like the missing middle. Like the
Yeah.
early booking was really strong, and then normally you'd expect it to kind of like hit a peak and then kind of level off, and instead it's like that middle booking window just has been the lowest, and in some places it's been like that for like 2 years almost. I think I'll bring that up again because I know some very large property managers in like Alabama and Florida. Uh, Last year when it was missing, they assumed it was because their rate was too high. This year they've been much more conservative, and they're still finding that. So it may be somewhat of a consumer trend that has changed. Um, awesome. Thank you, Maria. Anyone else want to let us know what's been going on in Hilton Head?
I guess at least for us, we saw a really strong January, February, and then it significantly dropped off. Right now, I'd say our ADR is really strong, but our occupancy is lower, and guests are definitely booking a lot closer to arrival.
Interesting. Is that shorter booking window also occurring at kind of like an lower ADR position for you? I assume it probably is, but are you seeing that come in like after cuts?
So we're a little bit strategic when it comes to that, where, on the booking platforms, you can kind of do promotional rates and things. So if we bump them up on the back end and then cut them once they hit the booking platforms, it looks like a discount, but it's not actually. So it's a little bit of playing a game with the numbers.
That makes sense.
They're definitely savvier shoppers.
Yeah. So you're keeping prices somewhat stable by using the promotions and kind of adjusting on the back end.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Cool. Well, if anyone else wants to jump in, please feel free. And also feel free to interrupt me or ask me a question or tell me your perspective as I'm kind of speaking here. But we'll start here on Hilton Head. And let me get my little pen out. Just as a small thing for non-Wheelhouse users or for Wheelhouse users who don't know, this is under the market reports here. This is all going to be high-level data, so you can see we're kind of covering a pretty broad area. We have, this Hilton Head area. It also goes a little bit north. If you're looking at the numbers or can see the numbers here, these are pretty small numbers. So even though it's like still pink, this is like less than 1,000 listings, whereas this here is obviously the majority of the listings. You can access any market in the country for free from Wheelhouse, and we'll give you these kind of like just top level statistics, which is great. Few little highlights here that are kind of interesting. Active listings starting to slide a little bit. Adjusted occupancy kind of down slightly year over year, but ADR kind of up. Have you guys had I don't know what the inventory situation is like in this market. Have you guys had a lot of like growth over the last few years in listings?
I would say for us, not a ton of growth, but we're a boutique company. We're not really trying to grow, so we're not actively marketing for it. We try to stay within a niche that we're in currently. But I would say on the island, the town provides numbers on the short-term rental permits. At one point, it seemed like they were getting to near around 8,000, and when I looked the other week, it seems like it has scaled back, and maybe now we're around 7,000. So some of those could be dropping out of there, or people are just not renewing those permits in a timely manner.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's been kind of a big trend since 2021 for the inventory growth to have been really high. That's been
Yeah.
probably one of the most impactful things, I think, for markets that have seen pressure this year and last year is this substantial growth in inventory. It's very easy to grow inventory. There's been lots of new owners who honestly purchased at pretty high prices. We're starting to see that turn back the other direction in some markets. So I think it makes sense. I think it'll be a lot longer to correct than it took to build up. Because there's the sunk cost. I think people will stay in a little longer even if they're not making as much enough money. But that has one of the things that I think is pretty interesting is when there's been this pressure is almost in every market, demand growth has continued to grow. So even though there's pressure in some markets for occupancy in our space, it's generally because the supply has outgrown the demand, not necessarily that demand has dropped. And that's true pretty much in most areas without there being like a big emergency or something.
Yeah, I agree on that. I think that's definitely our issue here. There is more supply than there is demand. And the travelers these days, I think, as we are all experiencing, are not looking for that standard Saturday to Saturday travel time. They're not looking for 7 days. They're looking for 3 to 4 night stays. They want to be able to travel multiple times throughout the year to different destinations instead of just having one great big vacation.
Yeah, totally agree. I was poking around. I normally do this before I do one of these. I look at the kind of CVB informations and things. I didn't find any reports that I had decided to share. They did have like a visitor report for Hilton Head, like a survey. And I thought it was kind of interesting, but I felt like the sample size was a little odd. So I didn't decide to share it. I didn't know if you could actually draw off of it because I didn't know if it was like really a good sample of like who comes or if it was just a good sample of who decided to fill out the survey.
Right, right.
You know
Kind
what
of
I
like
mean?
reviews. Yeah.
Yeah, because they were talking about like, they had, I would imagine like there's a lot of people filled it out from what states came, and there was a lot of West Coast states, which surprised me. But I don't know, like I was surprised that there was like not as many people from in-state who filled it out, and maybe that was this part of the survey. But they had some, but I figured that like those proportions didn't seem quite right. My guess would be like where do the majority of your people come from? Do you think?
So we're a drive destination and we get a lot of Ohio, Pennsylvania. Since COVID, a lot of Tennessee, definitely a lot of Atlanta, and different Georgia areas. But anywhere that's really drivable.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking. Um, And I was thinking that it may also have more people from within the state. Um, so yeah, I decided not to share that. It is on those CVBs. You can find it. It was interesting, particularly some of the international stuff, but the numbers didn't quite make sense to me to extrapolate off of, so I decided not to pull it up. Um, let's hop over here to the occupancy side, and I'll come back to what you said about the 7 night Saturday to Saturday. I think that's pretty interesting. But at a top level, occupancies here, what we're looking at is I'm on this trends, which is going to show us year over year, month over month occupancies. We're looking at, let me switch this. I want to look at the entirety of the market. So kind of just all listings, whether they're professionalized or not, good or bad. And then we're looking at occupancy. And this is just a good view. I like to look at it because it gives us a quick idea of kind of like what's going on in the market at large. I think occupancy is one of the top KPIs to look at to get a sense. Obviously, like RevPAR and things are going to give you maybe a better sense, but once you start adding ADR values into it, you really have to kind of understand like the makeup of the bedrooms and that kind of thing. The benefit of occupancy is there's the same day in the month for any property in the world. General seasonality makes sense. You guys know this, so I won't dig into it too hard. Low season through the winter, shoulders in the spring. Interestingly, it looks like about a pretty, maybe a little worse in September, October than March, April, May. August kind of tones down a little, and it doesn't quite look like you have a super strong spring, maybe like they sometimes expect in Florida. Does that sound about right?
I would say that spring is pretty strong here because you do have multiple spring breaks. So you have the northerner spring break, you have Florida spring break, and because we're in between both of those, we get hit, from those different
Mhm.
directions. The Georgia people also have a different type of spring break as far as the dates go. We also have Easter. Um, we have the RBC Heritage that is hosted here every year right around Easter. So March and April does tend to be pretty decent here just because of those multiple events going on.
Yeah, I pulled this up. I just hopped over to the daily level for the historical. So under historical occupancy, Easter really crushed it this year. Pretty strong across March. No
Hmm.
date really spiking up into a super high occupancy. So that's kind of interesting because it does look pretty robust in that there's you can see that these weekday troughs are much higher. Partly, I wonder if that's maybe people are asking for too high of a length of stay over that period. Because you can definitely see that there's some strength here, but it's not like a spike, right? There's still a lot of vacancy across the market. So pretty interesting. You're right. There is strength there. It does go through the weekdays. I wonder, my hunch here is maybe the market's not offering the short enough stays for those. But one thing to keep in mind too this year, because we do know that like when we look at this, we can see last year March was much stronger. Obviously, Easter was over there. April made up for some of that, but there seemed to be a lot more strength in March last year. And we do know the spring breaks across the other Southeast markets were very weak this year. If you talk to your colleagues in Florida or Alabama coast or Texas, they'll tell you that they were much more panicked about the performance of the year because of the spring. Kind of moving forward into May, this does look like it's probably going to fall a little short from an occupancy perspective to me, 44%. So got to get about 20% more occupancy on the books to hit last year's occupancy. There's about a week left. It's definitely possible. If we look forward, we can get an idea of how booked. This is definitely possible. I mean, the majority of this is going to be occurring on a holiday, really, and then I think there's another weekend. So it is possible, but it does kind of look to me like it's going to fall a little short in May. And then really the question here is, how is this summer pacing at 40% and 22% for July? How are you pacing for the summer right now for my Hilton Head friends?
I would say that looks pretty accurate. I mean, we are definitely down in July from where we would be in years past. Like, if I pull my pacing report right now, we're down 4% in June, which is going to be easy to fill in with the last minutes. But July, we're down 18%, which in past years, July is the strongest month here. It's the busiest month, and it's usually booked up first. And there's a lot of availability, not just with us, but I obviously look at competitors' websites and I see a lot of open weeks everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to do a little napkin math here and show you a quick. So if I go to this lead time distribution chart and we go to July and we're like, what? To the end of July, we're 9 weeks. So it's like a little more than 60 days. That was at about 50% last year of stuff on the books. And this year we're a little under 50, right? Because half of 73% is 36 and a half. So about 10% down. Yeah. So that makes sense. 10% of gross. It's a little bit more. It's like 30% down at the market level. So yeah, July is down. I did the same kind of activity for June, and it was also down a bit because June 2024 are at about 35 to 40. That was, around 70% was on the books already, and 70% of 69. I'm just going to use a calculator real quick. 70, oops, 0.7 times, come on, what is it doing? 0.7 times 0.69 equals, it's about 48%. So about 8% down. Okay, so that makes sense. So yeah, summer's trailing a little bit. I do like to just double check what's going on in the highest performance groups. So we were looking at the entirety of the market. If I go to the high performing, that's just like the top 15 to 20% of listings by revenue over the last year. So it's kind of historically based. And I just like to look if there's a little bit different trend here. We see pretty similar trend. Obviously, these numbers are much higher than at the market level, right? But the pacing is pretty similar through the summer. So they're not substantially performing different really in any of these months, other than just like the overall being higher. But those trends look about the same. May still looks like it's probably going to fall a little bit short. June and July are pacing in a pretty similar position. June is a little bit closer, I think, to that point. No, it's not. It was 75. So they're still behind. This needed to be 50%, still behind. The reason I like to look at this is sometimes you will find that the higher performing group is actually acting very different than the rest of the market. You've mentioned that this market, at least for you, seems to be pretty stable in terms of its pricing. They also potentially still have quite a lot of Saturday to Saturday 7 night. So maybe that usually indicates to me it's a little bit more stable, a little less dynamic. Sometimes you see the high performing group doing something different and actually performing on pace. This time we don't. Final thing I kind of want to look at here is just asking rates. So asking rates are the averages of what is being posted, like what's being advertised out there. And I think what you mentioned before, Erica, makes sense here. You can see that year over year, these are pretty similar. The rate isn't really shifting too much, even in the summer. So the market isn't pushing rates too much. It's also not really cutting the rates. You can see here in April, posted rates were higher, which makes sense for Easter. So that one's a little harder to break out. But even in May, posted rates are a little bit higher than they were last year, even though it looks like that the market's going to fall a little short. Small increases here in June and July. Even though that's pacing behind, it does kind of indicate to me that pricing is very stable here, but also that the market maybe is contributing to its missing middle, if it has that kind of missing middle, by not really adjusting for the price. If we look at the high performance group, we see a similar trend here. There's not too much difference. They lost a little bit of ground in March, so they undercut, which may make sense. That's them responding. June is not yet fully higher, and July is a little bit lower. We can kind of see where that's occurring though. Future, because that's kind of interesting. Scan rate. Do this. Just have it a little lower. Wonder why. Okay. So in terms of one question I have for you is, do you guys do the Saturday to Saturday 7 night? Or do you come off it?
We try to start with the Saturday to Saturday 7 night, and then we eliminate the Saturday to Saturday and just say 7 nights. Then once 7 nights is not really working so well, then we drop to 5 nights, arrive anytime. And so that's kind of where we're at right now with June and July, is we're on a 5 night minimum and kind of flexible with their arrivals.
That makes sense.
We also vary depending on which communities we're talking about. Some of ours that aren't walkable to the beach, we don't really require Saturday to Saturday or 7 nights, even from the beginning, right, Erica?
Yeah, there's definitely some of them. We try to start a little bit more rigid though, and then we kind of start to back off of it as we're seeing the patterns. Obviously, once that booking window opens up in January, we want to be as solid as possible, and try to obtain as much revenue as we can and get it locked in. But as we're seeing that slows down, that's when we start to kind of open up the gates.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think this right now is pretty critical for June, and probably pretty critical for timing for July, because pacing behind, the market in general is pacing behind. There's either going to be a point where there's a risk that prices could collapse if people in the market who are really pacing behind start just tanking rate. And you kind of have two levers available. You have the minimum length of stay lever. You have the price lever. I have noticed that on the eastern kind of Carolinas and Georgia, those 7 to 7 night and longer length of stays are still very much in place. Whereas across the Gulf, Over the last 2 years, they've really eroded those minimum length of stay requirements due to the occupancy pressures that have been there kind of consistently. So I'm kind of seeing that trend will probably continue to come up, and people will not hold those as quickly or hold them as long, and in some cases not put them in near as steep in general. But I think the biggest risk here is that that market price starts to collapse if people really come into this high season low. So June is, in my opinion, pretty critical. It's within 5 weeks now to the end of June. That means most weeks are within 30 days. That one's got to get like up to pace, because competing at the very last minute could be very risky. And July, you have a little bit of time to experiment with, right? But not a ton. Now, one thing that I'm not sure about here is the pricing does remain pretty stable in the market overall, which is pretty interesting to me. Which makes me think that the market is not super reactive to what people are doing, or like to their own performance. So there's a chance that you may not need to like tank everything, and there's also a chance that the market won't collapse, that they'll just like eat a lower occupancy, or they'll do it at the very last minute. So the key might be competing like for June just now, right? Like just making pretty consistent adjustments to try to bring that pace up now. Start doing minor stuff in July, and you may not ever have to compete. Like the goal would be to not compete if it collapses like a week out, right? Because that's just the toughest position. That means everyone's rate position will fall apart, and then you're still kind of just gambling if you get the reservations. What have you guys been thinking about doing for your for June and July right now from a revenue management perspective?
I mean, right now for June and July, where basically condos are down to 4-night minimums, houses are down to 5-night minimums. I'm just kind of creating promotions, sending out newsletters with promotions. All of our properties already come with like free pool heat. They have arcade games. There's ones that have hot tubs that there's no additional charge for. So we already kind of include a lot of perks. We already give out free beach gear, free baby gear. There's not a lot more. Like we're kind of an all, like I said, we're a boutique, so we're kind of all in from the start. So right now it's just kind of watching and making some little discounts, continuously changing up the listings, the description, titles, the photographs, anything to bump them in the algorithms. Just kind of, that's every Monday I'm in there and constantly monitoring things.
Yeah. One of the things I suggest doing, especially maybe is if a market is pacing behind, is if you find, so it's harder if you don't have a lot of inventory like this. If you mentioned you were pretty boutique, so I imagine your inventory is probably pretty well curated. If you have properties that haven't been performing as well, using them to see if there's booking at a lower price point, right? Because you can't do too much if there's just like less people, right? Or the consumer's behavior is changing. That's going to take time to figure out like how to adapt to that. But in some cases, it's just that the consumer is looking, but they're not booking at the price point the market has. It's like the market is not necessarily well optimized to the consumer. I often will suggest like using properties that haven't been performing well or didn't perform well the previous year and put them at different price points or different length of stay stuff, because you have a lot more room to still do better year over year. And if they book at like these different experiments, like maybe you're just open up the 3 nights but don't drop the rate, or maybe you drop the rate quite a bit, you can then, if they book up, you can make the decision like, hey, do we want to go to our owners and say like, hey, there's some concerns, we see that the market's pacing behind, do you want to take a lower ADR right now, just for the security of trying to get the bookings? That's usually a strategy I suggest. Especially it works best if you have big portfolios, because the revenue gets lost in the wash, but you can do it if you just find the properties that maybe have been underperforming. And I think that's my guess for June is probably just dropping length of stay stuff, especially if other people in the market are still holding that. July, you have a little bit more choice. But yeah, it's tough. And I think part of the reason, and this applies to, really everywhere, both Savannah and Hilton Head, I think part of the reason we see some of these pacing issues Part of it is just that we've had so much financial news in the news cycle, like when this booking window was supposed to really take off. And whenever there's financial news in the news, uh, we see like drops in booking across the nation. So the question is whether or not that's going to get made up, right? That's the unknown. Sometimes it does, usually not at the same rate position. So yeah, kind of interesting. And just one quick last question, Erica, and then I'm going to hop over to Savannah. What do you, how do you track your pacing?
So we use Streamline, and so we have, a revenue management software within Streamline called RevMax.
Yep.
And I just run the pacing reports through there on a daily basis and kind of see where we're at with reservations coming in. It gives me underperforming properties. And those are kind of where I make my list to, really make sure that I strategize with those first and foremost before I work on strategies for anyone else.
That makes sense. Just a quick hit on that. This is a free tool, but if you also like some visualizations about how these things are operating, we do offer, let me have this like on some cockamamie time frame. This is our business intelligence tool, and it is free. Basically, if you just link your account, you can access it. It'll look like this initially. It's monthly. You can choose KPIs. So I have this set to occupancy. You can filter down into any groups of listings. So you could look by bedroom count and roll it up and down. It's basically going to give you a visualization of that same kind of thing. So like, where are you? If I add it where I was at this time last year, it is highlighting the recent sales too. And where that becomes really useful, I think, is when you bring this down to the daily level, because if you're looking at a lot of the time people look at the monthly level and they're like, okay, raise the month or lower the month. But sometimes you'll see these differences like, hey, these dates are actually pacing really far ahead. I don't have an example here, but these dates are pacing a little bit behind, right? Because the green bar is bigger than the pink bar. It really allows you to fine tune where you make those adjustments so that you don't give up revenue on days that are strong. And then you can really easily identify when days are weak. So this is a great tool since we don't have people's direct data here, but this is the primary tool I'll use. And if you can pull market data into it as well. So something just to consider for everyone on the call, if you're looking for some additional tools to get an idea of how your performance is going. Okay.
Hey, John, if you just cover Tybee, because I think it has more similarity to Hilton Head, though Hilton Head tends to be, from a luxury standpoint, has many more properties that would fit that classification. But I think those who are in Hilton Head would get more. I mean, Savannah's completely different.
Yeah. We'll cover the top level. The interesting thing is I do also I work really closely with a client who has a big property in Savannah too. So we can do both. I'll hit these top level ones, and then what we'll do is we'll build a little one because we got a little bit of time.
Okay.
And I think that makes sense. So across the whole area, let me figure out what I'm doing here. Interestingly, kind of very similar general trend, which makes sense since we've got the kind of beaches coming across here. A little bit of loss in March, a little bit of gain in April. Interestingly, about equivalent, so really not too much loss. May looks pretty decent. Possible that it'll hit last year's occupancy. And then June and July, almost about 50%, about a third. My guess here would be in the beaches, this might be pacing a little different because this is combining both the city and the beaches. And the city tends to have a little bit shorter booking window. We can just.
And also, summer is not the season in Savannah. It's actually what's the shoulder season in the beaches is in season. Yeah.
It's a good market to have properties in both the city
Savannah in July and August.
Yeah. It is a good market to have a little diversity, but it makes your revenue manager have to work 3 seasons like it's high season.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we're on June and we're going to go to 35 days, 75%. So it's a little behind, which indicates to me that the beaches are probably a little behind here in a similar way to Hilton Head.
Yeah.
And then this one was 65 days, so 61. So a little behind, not as much for July though. Okay. And then I just want to glance at this asking rate one. I'm a person of habit, so I gotta go through the thing.
Okay.
Pretty similar trends. This is why we took the risk of covering both these markets together. We figured they might be kind of similar. Remaining pretty stable through the year, slight increases in June and July. This is interesting. I don't think I saw that on the Hilton Head one, which is it looks like people aren't competitively pricing past a certain point. Like either the market's not paying attention to pricing past this point, or they just have kind of like a lot more placeholder rates because you can see that there's these big increases. That could be driven in either the city or the beaches. But that does seem like something that I've seen quite a bit. What I would suggest here, actually, because if we look at this occupancy situation, the fall here is a little worse than the spring compared to Hilton Head, where they were a little bit more even. But it's not terrible. And I think one of the things, this is something I've heard from some of the Florida people down in South Florida in particular. They've spent a lot of time making sure that well, in general, the fall in like the South has been really surprisingly strong for people. So the spring keeps getting weaker compared to people's expectations, and the fall keeps exceeding people's expectations. I think this is twofold. One of them is I think people expect more out of the spring, so it causes their rates to be too high, and they don't expect as much out of the fall, so they start more conservative. So they see these early bookings a lot earlier, they're able to react. The second one is that I think there's a lot of instability in the beginning of the year, and people, especially this year, still want to travel. So they looked at other time periods, or they are already looking at cheaper time periods. So since fall tends to not be priced as high, people don't expect as much. It's a good deal. It's a perception of a good deal for people who are looking and are like, well, I want to come, but I don't really want to pay in spring. I'll pay in fall. We had a really good anecdote during our last revenue management roundtable from Cape and Coast, and they mentioned that they keep really good track of their return guests. They noticed a lot of people didn't book for the spring and actually did book for the fall. So the short answer here is, I think it's worth making sure your fall rates make sense are competitive to their historicals, because you may see an opportunity to make up any lost revenue elsewhere. Like that early booking, even though those guests might be able to cancel, a bunch of them won't. And that early booking can really bolster any shortfalls you've had earlier in the year. It'll give a little more confidence, and especially in the Savannah area, it looks like the market really isn't competing for those dates right now. So you may not even need to do much. You just need to be reasonably competitive. Obviously that'll differ depending on like how big your homes are. My guess here is like if there's a lot of condos, you have a city in this market area, so the cities tend to not compete that far out because they don't know when events are going to be. You may be limited in what you can do here, but if you do have properties that really don't have a competitive rate out there, that might be an opportunity.
Well, the other thing we have too is we have a lot of hotels in Savannah.
Yep.
Whose rates we can follow, and they tend to be high for fall right now.
Yeah. Hotels definitely do. I wouldn't follow them though.
Well, only because we know where the threshold is. We know they have more amenities and things, but we at least know, and looking at it, I mean, there's so many. For our 1 and 2 bedrooms, especially our 1 bedrooms, we have a lot of those, that they do often compete with the hotel stays.
Yeah, and 1 and 2 bedrooms, frankly, even if you are competitive, you're probably not going to move the needle on booking pace with those in the city. Very few people are going to book those in advance. Some will, unless you give them a really great deal, but the majority of that booking is going to come in the short term. anyway,
Right.
like relative short term, right? Especially those one bedrooms. One thing
Yeah.
I've noticed, and this is more anecdotal, Maria,
Mhm.
because I've actually managed a lot of apartments in Savannah,
Okay.
pre-Wheelhouse. I was the head of revenue management at Stay Alfred, so we had like
Yeah. Okay.
100 or whatever.
Mhm.
And then we also I work with a few clients that have some now. What I've noticed is that the weekday situation seems a lot weaker this year.
Yes. Oh, it's always been weak though, but it
Yeah.
is weaker, and that's why we hold to a minimum night stay along the weekends, is because oftentimes that's all that's booking, and it carries
Yep.
the highest rate.
Yep.
Incentivize them to stay the weekdays and take the rate on the weekends.
Yeah. I was talking to someone who, and he allows me to talk about what's happening there in
Yeah.
the Grant
Uh-huh.
property.
Yeah. Okay.
And last year the weekday occupancies they were able to maintain pretty solid weekday occupancies into the like, you know, through the high season and even into the spring and summer, close to 70%. Now the ADR was very, very, very low, right? We're
Mhm.
talking like well under $100 ADRs for those. But that
Ooh.
bolsters a lot when you have full price weekends. You know what I mean? This
Yes,
year it's like half.
exactly. Oh no. Okay.
Yeah, it's hard to get it to drive. It's like half the weekday occupancy at even less rate. So instead of being at like a $70 ADR, we're talking like getting to half it like a $50 ADR.
Mm.
So that weekday position is really eroded in Savannah this year, it seems like.
Yeah.
Not totally sure why. Weekend positions still seem pretty strong. Obviously, uh, St. Patrick's Day is very good, but
Yeah.
um,
Always is.
yeah.
And a lot.
Interestingly, go
Yeah.
ahead. Sorry.
And there were more last minutes this year on St. Patrick's Day than
Yeah.
previous years. So, yeah.
Yeah. So pretty interesting. I do think my guess here, because this is a little bit mixed, but the beachside stuff is probably following pretty similar to Hilton Head, and we do see some of those pacing issues. That pacing is going to be driven by the beaches because, like Maria said, not necessarily the high season for the city. Now, interestingly, this is something I do bring up to people why it's worth looking at the nearby market areas. So if you're looking at market data, not just looking at your own, especially when you're a drive-in location, it's because you are also potentially competing against these other market areas for the consumer. That consumer, when they're thinking of traveling, especially new consumers. So like, you know, obviously you have the people who like, we've gone every year, we always stay in this place. They're not going to be looking around. But all the new consumers that are like, I wanted to travel to this area, they're going to pop around and look at the other areas. And you're going to see if there's these pacing problems in other areas. Even though your market might remain stable in the rate, these markets may not. And it may take those consumers from you. So it's a good idea to know, like if you're in Hilton Head, well, these Savannah beaches are also low. So they're also probably going to be adjusting their rate position and potentially competing. That the city of Savannah isn't in high season. People might decide to go there, right?
The only thing I would say, John, is I would caution, because there's some big changes on Tybee
Mhm.
that Hilton Head may be able to take advantage of, but probably they probably aren't seeing as much. So we had mega managers come in to Tybee, and they're not providing the owners with the support they'd like, especially as it relates to property care. And so they're coming over to the smaller vacation rental companies. So those properties are usually the premier high rate properties. So from a company standpoint, we're not doing much organic growth with the properties that existed in the portfolio, but we're really doing gangbusters because we're targeting those properties that are at the premier level in the companies that we know aren't taking care of their owners.
That's really good. Honestly, when
And that exists in Hilton Head too, because I know at least one company that I worked for that's over there.
yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think when I was in Europe last year, they talk about this a lot because margins are so tight in Europe.
Mhm.
That like the key to building a business that, you know, can sell is we were listening to a consultant, Richard Vaughton, he's a great guy. And he was saying like the key to building a business that can sell is having good inventory. right? Not having the most inventory, it's having the best inventory, because top property, like what's happening is middle level properties are getting, there's too much competition. It's been too easy for people to just like get a place and throw some Amazon Basics furniture in there, you know, and put it up. Those are the properties that are suffering. If you can capture the top properties, it's going to be worth far more than a bunch of mid-level properties. So it's good that that the managers in these areas have an opportunity to capture those, especially through a more boutique experience. I think that's really a strength. I wouldn't be surprised if over the next 2 to 3 years, we really hear a lot about, like, there'll be another big wave of like smaller managers having an opportunity to grow, and especially grow with the best inventory by basically eating off of the big ones, Vacasa, V-Trips, these ones who've consolidated a lot and haven't really like figured out how to offer the service that's expected. I think that's especially true in the South. I think it's less important in some other areas of the country, but across the South, I think that ability to have an in-person interaction with people is very important.
Yes, that's in the country.
Yeah. Yeah. That's in the country for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, let's hop over and we'll pull up one in type. We got a few minutes here, and hopefully I can get this to it'll load in time. So this is our market sets tool. This tool is another data tool that we have. This one is got some free information. So anything I can do on this map is free. So you can see information on the properties individually. You can click on these and see quite a lot of data. You can get to the OTA link if you wanted to. That is going to be free. If you want this data aggregated together and tracked consistently, and also able to pull over into the pricing system or into the other data tools, that would be what's paid, but it is a subscription, so you can turn it on and off whenever you want. I'm just going to grab this zone here. Also, small caveat here. This data currently is only going to be our scraped data with that's been run through our AI model. The market report is an aggregate kind of like key data of direct data and scrape data. So we don't share our client data here at the listing level. Okay, let's just do this. Let's take bookable nights. Are there restrictions in Tybee about how many nights can be booked?
There are not, but you know, there's the whole, once you sell your property, you can't register.
Brutal.
Register the property. Yeah. So it's gone. So that was a way of them reducing the number of vacation rental properties.
Weird solution.
Yeah. Well, it's hurting the businesses, but I did want to mention, I'd be interested to see the length of stay, because it feels, it definitely, we came through with the 7 to 7, where when I worked at Tybee Vacation Rentals, we didn't do 7 to 7 or 7 nights Saturday to Saturday, except for a few very premier properties. And with the company Tybee Cottages, we went in that way, and the premiers did really well, but those properties, even the small ones with pools, were not booking, so we had to reduce it down. But I'd be curious to see what the market says.
Yeah, I can pull this one up real quick. Let me see here. Oh, do we not have one on here? Oh, we did. Distribution of length of stay. Where am I? 25. So let's see here. This is 7. So this is the problem I'm looking at this with. I'm looking at this with Savannah in here, and that's going to weight that average completely off because they're going to be primarily shorter. Let me see if I can get to it from here. I think the era of 7 to 7 night is going to be pretty much gone, except for very specific properties
Okay.
or like requirements. I think the way travelers are moving in millennial and younger generation, I have never booked a 7-night stay in my life.
I don't think I have either, but
Yeah. I will book a 6-night or a 5-night or like a 10 or longer. You know what I mean?
yeah. So that's what we went to for the beginning of for summer 2026 is we've gone to a 7-night to see how it works out. No, but you can arrive on any day. Fighting that a little bit with some of the properties. Old habits die hard.
Yeah, I think the any day arrival is really important. I'm a big fan of 5 nights because the only
Yeah.
reason is 7 nights a very specific like number from a psychological perspective, like an entire week, right?
Yeah.
But 5 nights means you'll get the 7s.
Right.
And you also have the opportunity for people to like I think it just makes it more visible, but it doesn't really open up that much of loss for you. I think the only thing is maybe just like closing a checkout on like you just don't want to split the weekend. That would be the main thing. So like
Right.
thinking about what check-in, check-out rules, like simple checkout and check-in restrictions on the weekend itself so that people don't break it apart. But maybe you don't want to do that because 7 nights will have to maybe break that apart.
We can always reduce it. I mean, it's going to be the larger, which we do have Saturday to Saturday, 7-night, on the more premier. So it's just going to be interesting to see how it pans out.
Can I
Yeah.
chime in?
Yeah.
Yes.
So what I would say to you about what you guys are talking about in the 7 nights versus, 5 nights or whatnot, what I will tell you, we started removing the 7-night thing 2-3 years ago. We started easing off of it.
Mhm.
Once you hook them for 5 nights, if you start doing gap night stays, we use Breezeway, if you're familiar with that, but
Yeah.
it sends automated messages. We do them prior to arrival and even while they're here, offering them a discount to add those gap nights. And I will tell you, once you get them to their destination and they fall in love and they're enjoying it, I can't tell you how many people add on the gap nights. They're like, well, we're here already. Now we're willing to spend the money because we're here and we love it. And that is how you fill your 7 nights. You go
Right.
from the 5 to 7 by just hooking them on 5. So think about that and what you're doing coming up, if that's an option for you guys. But starting small and letting them add, it really makes a huge difference, and it will really fill up those extra nights, and it won't like you guys are saying, like we all haven't traveled on 7-night stays. One, because we're in this terrible industry, but two, it's just not always economical to do so. But once you're on a trip, everyone gets into the mood of it, and you don't want to leave it. So start little, add the gap nights. I think you'll find that works a lot better than 7 nights.
And we did that at Tybee Vacation Rentals, and I absolutely agree with you. But you do
Yeah.
have to have a program that fills those gaps.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah. And Breezeway is the tool being used for operations, so pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I love that. It does a lot for us. We just started using their upsells through there. We're now charging. In the past, we were not charging for early check-in, late checkout. It seems like a lot more people in the industry are doing it. So we hopped on board about a month and a half ago and started offering it. We figured what's the worst people can say is no. But the amount of revenue that we're driving in right now, just from $50 an hour early check-in, late checkout when it's available, it has been huge for our revenue stream.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
That makes a ton of sense. I think that is a great way to approach it, especially if you're able. Like I remember we used to do that when I was back at Stay Offered, but I would just make our reservation team call lists of people when they were slow. Hey, can you call
Right.
and ask if they want it on a night? I'm glad that there's software that can do it now.
Yes.
But yeah, kind of along the lines with that, I think it makes sense to like, especially further out, hold those longer stays. I think 7-night is actually a psychological like it pushes it over psychologically. It's like putting something at $7 instead of $6.99, right?
Yeah.
And you still have a lot of ways to capture that. I also think that like really thinking about when to drop those for the high season is really key. Like, and it's going to depend year over year, depending, it's going to really be based on your own pacing, like not set a rule, but I think that, you usually can drop length of stay before you drop rate. And it's probably, in my guess, it's gonna be around like March. When you know how March is performing, that's when you want to start thinking about how you're adjusting for the summer. Like, do I need to adjust in parts? Do I need to do some experiments? Just because you can make smaller changes earlier without having to like give away the farm. This is like we're in the pretty short term here. You know, June is next month. July doesn't have a lot of time. There's a lot of space between 5 nights or 7 nights and 3 nights to make decisions, and it's just a little bit too short of a time, in my opinion, to really make those decisions. Maria, this one is Tybee. I can send this to you afterwards as well.
That'd be great.
I'll have Edson do that. And then you can see that those beaches are really driving that market level one. If we looked at Savannah, the market, this would look quite a bit different, but this kind of follows the Savannah one. I did pull a set where I filtered out stuff that wasn't available for more than half, for if they weren't available for half the year, I filtered them out. And I also picked stuff that had at least an annual occupancy of 50% last year. So I kind of filtered out some of the lowest performing stuff. You can see this aligns much more with that high performance group in the market report where we got higher numbers overall. But those trends are going to be pretty similar, right?
Mm-hmm.
Fairly strong Q1, a little bit of up down March and April. May looks like it's a lot closer. So May could be very close to where it hit last year. And then pacing a little better than the market for summer here than what we were looking at in that market report. But I think it's still a little below. So 85%, what's 70% of 80%? 0.7 times 0.8 is 56%. So actually it's pacing around where it was last year. So this group of listings in Tybee, the pacing seems pretty strong, right? And that you mentioned that earlier. Occupancy pace seems pretty good.
Right.
That seems to be about on pace last year. And then asking rates a little harder because I'm not controlling for like what listings were here. I don't want 2026, 2025. Pretty stable pricing so far.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a pretty good sign on Tybee there. That seems more stable than what we looked at the market level and also in Hilton Head.
Right.
Now, granted, I did filter out the lowest performing stuff.
And there are a lot of those on Tybee.
Yeah. There's at least a segment that's doing pretty decent.
Yeah. They've been around since, the 1940s and little enhancements to it. It's really interesting. But anyway, it's okay.
And that's the big thing I've really seen is like, there tends to be a trend where like, and it wasn't really that evident here, actually. I'm not seeing that. I think the pricing and the way people are doing revenue management is much more stable in these two areas, minus the city. Something that has been consistent is when there is a lot of pressure, what's happening is the high performance group is either on pace, so they're maintaining, or a little under, and then everything else is taking a much bigger share of the pressure, right? So you have like a lot, like you'll have situations where like you could have owners who are talking to other people and they're like, oh yeah, it's going totally great. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. And they have like nothing on the books. That I'm not seeing in this market as much. And I think it's because of the stability of the revenue management pricing, and also maybe the length of stay stuff. But as people start to abandon those rules, you may see more of that stretch, which is like lower performing properties will have a much bigger difference to stuff that's the highest performing. Cool. Well, I hope you guys found this helpful.
Thank you.
We'll send you the recording on this. And then if you want to talk to our team about getting access to our business intelligence tools, we'd love to help you do that and also give you a little training on that. Maria, same for you if you wanted to talk to me about it. I'll answer that email and then we're happy to do that. And then we do have another webinar today. So if you really don't want to get any real work done, come join us for the Revenue Management Roundtable. We have some great large property revenue managers going to be talking about trends.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Bye.